Thank you all for coming today. We're very excited to be able to put on this virtual field tour. Of course, we'd love to be able to take you guys out to the creeks and show you these restoration projects, but we're excited to also build this online database and reach people that maybe wouldn't have gone out on the field tour with us. Thank you all for registering for the event. I had a lot of registrations come in. Once again, I put if you're going to be applying for or applying this toward your professional development hours, I put the Google form questionnaire in there that is required for that. So just save that link. If you notated on your registration form that you were going to be applying that, we will reach out after and let you know once that application is verified. But just getting started, I'm today's host, Morgan Keeling with IRWP. I've been the community relations manager here since March, so not super long, but I was excited to be able to put together some videos for you guys today. And I was also excited to be able to go walk on these field tours myself with Travis and Sandy and get to know our watershed a little bit better. So Travis is our restoration specialist at IRWP. He's on today, and he's actually leading one of the virtual field tours. And then, of course, we have Dr. Nicole Hardiman, our executive director and leader at IRWP. And I'm sure when the Q&A comes up, if you guys have water quality related questions, she'll probably be a good one to pipe in. And then we also have Sandy Formica today. She's going to be joining on the meet a little bit later, but she is leading the second field tour, which covers a restoration project done at Cliff Gibbs, our board president's property, and then also two other sites, one in Rogers and one in Bella Vista. And we'll talk more about those in a little bit. But thank you again, Sandy, for helping us out with this and for being here today. So of course, this is the year of virtual. We would love to do these face-to-face events where you get to have these very conclusive discussions. And so at the end of this, if you have any ideas or thoughts, or if there are any resources that you need, please do reach out. If you haven't already, or if you're watching on the Facebook Live, please do sign in on the Google form. It's really important that we're able to track your viewership and track our impact. If you need that link, it's been posted on our Facebook page and in the Facebook event. Feel free to at any time add comments in the chat. We'll moderate that at the end, and also keep your mics muted, especially if you're calling in. If I have to mute you, you can't unmute yourself. You'll have to end the call and call back in. But I don't think we have anyone doing that. But anyway, thank you for following those guidelines. And then, like I had mentioned, we have the quiz put in the Facebook event, posted in the Facebook event and in the Meet chat. But if you need it, you can email me at morgan@irwp.org, and I will help you get that whatever way you need to. So before we jump into the field tours, I have to go over some IRWP stuff, of course. I know many of you are so familiar with the organization, and I see some board members on here, and thank you guys for being here so much. But we are a 14-year-old nonprofit, non-governmental organization. Our learning center is in Cave Springs, which is where Nicole and I are right now. It typically is open to the public, and we have field tours and do youth education here. But of course, with COVID, we've kind of swayed away from a little bit of that. But of course, if you've driven through Cave Springs, you've seen the Watershed Sanctuary, and our Learning Center is right across from that, and we have the pavilion out there. So our watershed territory covers Northwest Arkansas and Eastern Oklahoma, a huge chunk of Washington and Benton counties, tipping just down into Crawford County, and then on the Oklahoma side, in Delaware and Cherokee, Adair, Sequoia counties. So this watershed has historically been really important, and through some many years of nonprofit management, we've been able to restore and conserve much of this watershed, which in the context of rapidly urbanizing Northwest Arkansas is really important to the health and natural resources that we all know and love here. So our mission is to improve the integrity of the Illinois River watershed through public education, outreach, and the implementation of conservation and restoration practices throughout the watershed. So in 2019, we were actually able to implement over 2,400 linear feet of streambank protection, 404 acres of rotational grazing systems, 106 acres of forest stand improvement, 19 custom conservation plans, which our restoration specialist Travis does. And if you're interested and you live in our watershed, I'm sure he would be more than happy to get with you and understand how you can help conserve your land. And then we forested our grass riparian buffers on 9.53 acres in 2019. So all of this is part of that preserving and protecting natural resources in Arkansas and in Oklahoma. So, of course, if you Google Northwest Arkansas population, one thing you're going to see, one verbiage you're going to see is rising toward becoming one of the nation's 100 largest metropolitan areas. And since I've lived here, I know exactly why. We have such an abundance of great community involvement. We have great natural resources for outdoor activities. This really is a very special area. And it's showing that it's grown approximately 20% from 2010 to 2019. So of course, whenever you're adding people and the population is booming, your economy likely is going to be growing and you're going to have land use changes and development. So what happens there is that as the land use changes, there's more impervious surfaces, more parking lots, roofs, and roads that don't soak up groundwater and store it and filter it. So we have to move more stormwater through our channels, and what that does is downstream is it can increase the volume and velocity of water, which can increase erosion events. So our goal ultimately is implementation of a practice. We want to connect you within our watershed. We want to be able to connect those people with the resources they need to implement a practice. And we have a Streambank erosion inventory study that will be coming out in 2021. If you need that, or if you want to see that, you can email me and we can get that out to you, what we have of it out to you, and we will be posting that early 2021. But one thing to note here is that we do have an online learning center which covers our suites of practice, and those are streambank erosion restoration, riparian buffers, which goes very closely in with what you're going to see today, rotational grazing, which we did a webinar on last week, and residential and commercial low impact development, or LID, and then land conservation. And then of course we've done plenty of youth education in the past, and we'll hopefully and probably pick that back up once COVID begins. But we do have online learning center resources. If you have little ones at home and you want to do water quality activities, we have some great ones on there for you, and for teachers if they need those resources as well. Didn't want to leave that out. So we're getting to the first part of our field tour, and the first part we go to Sager Creek with Travis. And Sager Creek is such an important part of the Siloam Springs community, and Siloam Springs City has been a great partner with us and has been, motivated and excited to implement restoration practices. So we're excited to be able to show this, and I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and share the video another way so that it is not a bad quality.
Hi, I'm Travis Cheney with Illinois River Watershed Partnership. I'm our restoration specialist. I oversee our riparian restoration program, which is a program designed to reforest 20 miles of stream bank in the Illinois River watershed. We're here today in downtown Siloam Springs, Arkansas on Sager Creek, which has been historically an extremely important resource for the community of Siloam Springs. Now, if you had come here 150 years ago, this would have looked significantly different. This stream bed that I'm standing in right now could theoretically have been 4 or 5 feet higher than it is now, meaning the stream would have been more connected to its floodplain. It would have been a lot easier for the stream to get up out of its floodplain. As land use has changed over the past century, the stream has become incised like a lot of streams in northwest Arkansas. But this stream has been very important to the city of Siloam Springs and the surrounding communities since the city's founding. And so the city government has done a lot in the past 10 to 15 years to work to improve this stream. One of the main ways that municipalities, landowners, ranchers, residential developers can improve water quality is by making sure that there is healthy, dense riparian vegetation along the stream. And what we mean by riparian vegetation is that vegetation that is within the floodplain of the stream. It's impossible to have a healthy, functioning stream without also having healthy, functioning riparian vegetation. They're both part of a complex system that keeps these stream systems healthy. Having healthy, dense riparian vegetation along your stream bank accomplishes several things. First of all, it builds roughness in the channel. When a stream is mowed all the way down to the water's edge, there's very little growing there to slow down the destructive stormwater and dissipate the energy. When you have trees, when you have grasses and sedges, when you have brush along your stream bank, it's going to break up some of that energy, slow down the stormwater, keep it from washing out banks downstream, and it's also going to help that water drop out some of the sediment and pollutants that it's carrying. When it drops out that sediment, sometimes it's building point bars like this, sometimes it's dropping soil and silt into the floodplain, increasing the fertility of the floodplain and allowing for more plant growth. Now when you have more plant growth with deep roots, whether that be trees or shrubs or deep-rooted grasses, those plants are helping to infiltrate stormwater down into the soil profile and keep the water table at a high level. When all the vegetation is removed from a stream bank, sometimes you can get into a situation where the water table drops and you have very little flow in your stream. So in that case, a stream that used to flow year-round can in some cases become intermittent. It can flow only after a heavy rain. So having this dense riparian vegetation is essential whether you want to catch fish, whether you want to have clean drinking water, whether you want to cut hay. All of these things require dense, healthy vegetation to keep this stream system healthy. So we all know that humans love the sound of moving water. Communities throughout the centuries have been located next to water sources, and Siloam Springs, Arkansas, where we're at now, is no different. We're standing on the city's paved walking trail right next to Sager Creek. Now, if you were to go anywhere in northwest Arkansas, you're going to find something similar in almost every town you go to. Either a paved walking or cycling trail right next to a water body. Now, if you can imagine 10 years ago being on this paved trail, there were no trees here. It was mowed clear down to the bank. If it's August and it's 95 degrees, this black paved trail is extremely hot. Now, in the past 10 years, as the trees have grown up, not only is the creek shaded, the algal blooms reduced, but the paved walking trail adjacent to the stream is a lot more pleasant to use. On top of that, think of all the maintenance that went in every week to having several city staff going up and down several thousand feet of stream bank with mowers, weed eaters, trying to keep this thing maintained. Not only is it time intensive, but mowing on a steep bank like this is not safe. So the city has not only saved itself a lot of money stopping maintaining this every week with mowers, but they've created a really pleasant environment for folks to come out, enjoy the park, and enjoy the creek. It's a win for everybody. Now, 10 years ago, this bridge directly behind me was a dam. And where I'm standing right now, the water would have been 6 or 8 feet deep and just pretty stagnant. There's a lot of algae growing on top of it. The city removed the dam and put this span bridge in. And what I want to show y'all is the soil and sediment that's been recruited here just in the past 10 years, just enough to support life. So you can see there's black willows, there's sycamores. In the late summer, early fall, you see a lot of goldenrod, you see a lot of great blue lobelia, you see a lot of cardinal flower. These really gorgeous, important plants are already starting to colonize this little point bar as the river is finding its old meander again and healing itself. And the riparian vegetation plays a really important part in that. Not only is it slowing down the stormwater, but it's also, trapping pollutants. It's also providing pollinator and wildlife habitat, and it's really beautiful as well. So this is just a good example of how a stream can start healing itself just when we remove some of the human impediments to it. So here we are on the campus of John Brown University in Siloam Springs. We're just a half-mile downstream from downtown Siloam. Still affected by the land use in an urban area, but we're in a part of the stream where the surrounding vegetation has changed very little over the past 100 years. It's stayed in somewhat of a riparian forest. And so when we get to this area, we start to see the stream taking more of a natural pattern. We're seeing more riffles and pools and runs, seeing different sizes of sediment in the stream bottom. A lot more fish. Me and my son come here quite often, catch smallmouth and largemouth, lots of little pumpkin seeds and bluegill in this stretch of the creek. And you can see there are trees hanging over the creek, a lot of cover under here for fish. You can see a lot of woody debris in the channel slowing down that storm flow. A lot of boulders and cobble, different sizes of sediment for different species to colonize and make a home and change this from just a stormwater conveyance into a healthy, functioning stream ecosystem. And a lot of that has to do with the way that this riparian vegetation interacts with the biology, the chemistry, and the hydrology of the creek that it is growing next to. Now, one of the things that makes the Illinois River watershed unique is the interbasin transfer of water. And what I mean by that is that most of the towns and municipalities in our region actually get their water from a different watershed, from the Beaver watershed. But then that water is taken from Beaver Lake, it's treated, it goes to homes and factories and schools all over the region. And then the wastewater, the effluents, is discharged into streams just like Sager Creek in the Illinois River watershed. So we're standing here on Sager Creek, just outside of Siloam Springs, and behind me is the Siloam Springs wastewater treatment plant, the effluents of which go straight into Sager Creek. Now, historically, one of the biggest problems in the Illinois River watershed was an excess amount of phosphorus, one of the nutrients that comes from wastewater treatment plants. Now, over the past 10 years, wastewater treatment plants across the region have spent millions and millions of dollars to upgrade their treatment facilities. And now they're putting significantly less nutrients into the water than they did 10, 15 years ago. A recent preliminary erosion study by IRWP has shown that now one of the main contributors of excess nutrients, mainly phosphorus, to our watershed doesn't come from wastewater treatment plants anymore. It comes from streambank erosion. Our preliminary studies show that in some cases twice as much phosphorus is getting into our watershed from streambank erosion than from all of the municipal water treatment facilities in the region combined. So that's why it's so important for us to try to address stormwater at its source, to make sure we keep really healthy, dense riparian vegetation. We can keep some of that sediment with all of those nutrients bound up in it from going downstream and polluting our water sources.
So thank you once again, Travis, for taking us on that tour, for taking me on that tour personally, and taking me kind of on the backwoods journey on JBU. So next up is the field tour led by Sandy Formica. So we started out actually at Cliff Gibbs' property on, I think it, on the Osage Creek in Siloam area, and then we went to Rogers and saw their second installation, and then we went to Little Sugar Creek last, which is near the Bella Vista Park, which is really a beautiful spot if you haven't been out there. But really what's important is the restoration that they've done. Here is a before picture of Little Sugar Creek. You'll see the after in the video, and we have a few more photos for you of the before and after on those, especially if you're interested in seeing those. So.
Well, we are on Osage Creek, which is a major tributary to the Illinois River, and we did a restoration project here we constructed it in 2015, at the end of 2015. So this project is 4 years old, and the old cut bank was here where this white post is, all along here, and the river was taking out the landowner's field where he grazed his cattle, and he was losing quite a bit of property. Somewhere, depending on the flood event, you have 50 acres plus. The river was very unstable. There were debris jams everywhere, and there were remnant cut banks across from here when the river used to be on the other side. So there was just cut banks and debris jams all through here. And so we continue to remove invasive species of plants out here. So most of what you're seeing behind me is almost all natives. Now you're going to see Johnson grass in this field, and we probably have a little bit, but we don't have much because we treat for Johnson grass and other invasives, so we can have a healthy stand of natives that's going to support wildlife. Our restoration is about 2,500 feet, and the design, we use natural channel design principles, so we mimic stabled areas of the river, and in this case there's quite a few riverine floodplains. If you look over there, you can see a mature hardwood forest. That's all flooded area with little side overflow channels and wetlands, and we mimic that part of the natural channel in our design. From here out, we rebuilt the floodplain using a towwood bench as the foundation. So it prevents the bank from continuing to erode. And then we rebuilt floodplains back on top of it. And we included in our design on this side a couple of wetland depressions and an outflow. So when the water rises, it actually fills these wetlands, and then there's a little outflow area downstream. So this is our outlet, and this type of feature with the wetlands in the floodplain and then an outlet back to the stream, we found that throughout this site naturally, and so when we designed this, we mimicked what was here naturally. And then if you look across the river from here, that was all a cut bank previously. Where this gravel is, on the other side of that is natural wetlands, riverine wetlands. But the river used to be over there, and so there was this long cut bank through there. And we went ahead and sloped that bank back and planted it with native vegetation and restored that as well. So instead of seeing, just a cut bank, now you see what it should look like, healthy native riparian vegetation. So we are on Osage Creek again, but now we're at the headwaters in Rogers, Arkansas, and this is the area where Osage Creek begins. And basically this restoration project was done because the stream was threatening the trail system that runs along the creek. So that's the Razorback Greenway. And also the city bought this property to create a nature park, and they wanted us to restore this section of Osage Creek through the nature park that in the future they're going to develop and have more trails so people can enjoy the natural environment. We completed construction in August and revegetation maybe by the end of September. And so because we just completed it, you can actually see the structures that we built. So downstream of this rock structure, that's a towwood bench. You can see the root rods sticking out. Those root rods and the tree stem go another 25, 30 feet back into the bank. And then we reconstructed that bank. So we've got 2 soil lifts on top of the tow wood. Okay, we're on the downstream end of the Osage Creek, Upper Osage Creek project. And what you're seeing right now behind me is a tow wood bench. The old cut bank was where the line of mature trees is over there. And we completely rebuilt the bank back out. We built a tow wood structure first. As the others, it goes all the way to bedrock. And then we built these floodplains on top using what we call bioblocks, but it's an encapsulated soil, and there's a hard coconut fiber. It's about 6 inches wide. It's a foot tall. It's on the base of these. And the erosion control fabric in this space gives your vegetation some time to get established before it disappears. So that's why we install these. If we just tried to put soils and plants, the first flood event would take most of it away. And we were just at the lower Osage Creek project. This is the exact same technique we used on top of the tow wood. And you can see we had a really nice stand of vegetation there. And so eventually the trees and shrubs that we have planted will hold the soil in. But that's why we recommend 5 years of maintenance, is to make sure you get that vegetation established. That's about how long this fabric will last at the most. And so this is our inner berm elevation. This is our bank full elevation. And then this grass that you see here, those are oats. We were doing this planting in the summertime, so for our nursery crop we used oats because it's a warm season plant. If we're in a cool season, we use winter wheat. The photo you saw upstream, or the picture you saw upstream, that was winter wheat that was coming in. And as you can see, the oats have gone to seed. They will disappear, they will not persist. And if we come back next year, you're going to see quite a few native plants. What's important to note here is how big these trees are that were existing. And that's one thing that's nice about this watershed, Osage Creek, is there are incredibly old, mature trees that run along the riparian. And unfortunately, lots of those trees are getting undermined because of streambank erosion. And we actually end up seeing quite a few on the very downstream end on our project. So this type of project is, these trees aren't going to go into the water. They're going to stay there and live out their lives in the riparian. And that's what we want to see more of throughout this watershed. But I want to also point out, you can see I'm standing next to a grade control structure, and then there's one above me, and then there's another one downstream. And so these are our ripple grade control structures. The one that's most upstream is holding that water elevation on the tow wood. It's best to keep that wood wet, and then it won't decay. But the top part of it, that's why the vegetation establishment is so important, is once our tree roots get established, then it will be okay, because those trees eventually, or at least the top part of them, begin to decay. And then also I'd like to point out that all the trees used at this site were repurposed from developments. So the developer saved the trees for us, the entire stem with the root ball, instead of burning them, and then we utilized them to construct our tow wood. We also did a small tributary. It's called Stony Brook. And what I'd like to say about this is this small tributary used to run through this entire field And when everything was developed in this area, it got squished into just this tiny stream channel, or at least the length of it is probably only 30% of the length that it had before. So what does that mean? It means you have to dissipate all that energy with only 30% of the stream channel. And what we ended up doing was a series of rock drop structures. And so you can see them behind me. And we've been through a pretty good size event, and they've done well. We created floodplains adjacent along the entire stream. We replanted with native vegetation. And, you know, really the clock's ticking. If that native vegetation can get established and growing, that's going to give this a better chance of working once a big flood comes through. Right now it looks fantastic. There's a lot of water in the stream. This doesn't flow all year round. In the summer it dries up, but one thing about what we designed here is these drop structures create deep pools, and so we're hoping at a minimum the pools will hold water through the summer. Okay, we're on the very upstream of the Osage Creek Restoration Project in Rogers, Arkansas. And basically the creek had taken out the walking trail that many people in this area use. It's part of the Razorback Greenway. It's to my left. It's up on top of this terrace. And so the last big flood, the city had to completely rebuild the trail. We put in our bioblocks and revegetated with native plants. Because the trail is so close to this, the city decided to put this fence up for a safety reason. And anyway, again, this has been very effective in protecting the trail, and they should not have any more problems after this. We are out at our Little Sugar Creek project, and this is one of my favorite projects. We just finished building it, the heavy equipment construction in May, and then we completed planting probably about 2 or 3 months later than that. And of course, we continue to maintain this site. This particular site, which is located, we're kind of at a point where Bentonville, Bella Vista, and Benton County all come together. I think this project runs through all 3 of those, but across over here is the Bella Vista Park, and then on this side is private land. What was happening here is there was this huge cut bank all along Little Sugar Creek, and there was a pattern problem because it was like the stream was going straight, and then all of a sudden it had to make a 90-degree turn. And when the floods came, it was really difficult to make that turn, and so there was just all this flood debris, you know, big trees, everything accumulated, log jams all through here, along with a eroding stream bank. We slightly changed the pattern of the stream. When we did a review of the historic photos, it turned out that there was a much more friendly pattern about 30-40 years ago, and we found the remnant channel, and we basically just recreated the channel that was here previously, and we built a plug through here, and then the leftover channel we turned into rivering wetlands. So that's all still part of the stream channel. It's just that the flood waters, as the water rises, those wetlands fill up, and it acts as an overflow for those big flooding events, which gives a lot of relief to the main channel. So the way we stabilized the stream banks was we built a towwood bench, and you can see one over here, and then there's one upstream of here, and then we rebuilt using soil lifts, we reconstructed the banks and planted with native vegetation. So we are in the Ozark Highlands ecoregion. So all the plant species that we use here would be native to the Ozark Highlands ecoregion. There's a structure, there's two rock structures that we put in here for grade control. And I talked at previous sites that we use those structures to help keep the toewood benches wet. But another great purpose for these structures is that you get aeration of the water. So all the living organisms associated with the river system, they like oxygenated water. And so when the water flows through these structures, it reoxygenates that area, which is extraordinarily beneficial. These rock structures also create really deep holes in the river, and the fish love them as habitat. They like the rock for cover as habitat. So all of this creates wonderful habitat. So we have a series of two structures here because we wanted so much water on our wood, which is protecting the toe of the upstream bank. And so we wanted to slightly drop this down. So the other structure is helping us get back to grade on that downstream ripple. And you don't want these structures to be too tall or have too much of a drop, or the fish won't be able to pass through them. So that is part of the design, is to ensure that there's a way that the fish can still move through the structures. This project was funded through an EPA Wetlands Program Development Grant with the City of Bentonville matching or providing the matching funds through a Walton Family Foundation grant. So behind me is the old channel that we turned into riverine wetlands. So the channel is still part of the river system. And I love this part of the project, creating wetlands. In my feeling is wetlands are the heart of our ecosystems. They provide diversity to the habitat, and I just can't say enough good things about them. And so this wetland is brand new, and hopefully the RWP will come back later, and maybe a couple of years later, and film it again. And it's going to be full of native, diverse wetland plants, birds, songbirds. You can see we've already got a mudflat that's established through the floodwaters. There are certain species of birds that love that, and that kind of habitat is becoming more and more rare. So yeah, we just completed this construction late spring, early summer this year, and I'm in the wetland area, and you can see we already have quite a few wetland plants that have come in. And some other important aspects is, as the floodwaters rise, or as the river rises, this actually fills with backwater early on, and it acts as a big settling basin, so it helps to filter out pollutants in the river system, in addition to the biodiversity that it brings. And also it can act as a nursery for fisheries. This is connected below Bankful, so definitely it can act as a nursery for our fisheries too.
Okay, and thank you, Sandy, for taking me on that tour. That was the second time I got to go see the Little Sugar Creek restoration site, and I am very excited to go back in the spring and next summer to see how that vegetation is going out there. So next, I'm going to hand it off to Travis, and he is going to talk a little bit about our riparian restoration program.
All right. Well, thanks. As we've mentioned before, my name's Travis. I'm the restoration specialist for IRWP, and I manage our riparian restoration program. So for those of y'all who are in some of our priority subwatersheds, if you live near Bentonville, Highfill, if you live near Springdale or Lincoln, Arkansas, or Prairie Grove, reach out to us if you have a stream or creek on your property, because we have funding available to help implement best management practices for water quality on your property, whether you are farmer, rancher, residential homeowner, municipality. We have a suite of best management practices that we can help fund and implement, and we can help with conservation planning on your property. So we can put together a plan of very concrete steps you can take to improve water quality on your place. So I think my contact information should probably be made available to you. And if you're interested at all, reach out, and we'd love to assist you however we can in helping you meet your land management challenges. So thanks.
Thank you, Travis. And I have just a couple more slides for you guys before we'll open for the Q&A. So I just wanted to show you guys some more photos that Sandy had provided about the Little Sugar Creek restoration. She provided this before restoration photo, and then of course you got to see some of the after restoration in the video as well. But I wanted to provide this slide not just for the before and after, but also Sandy's email is on there if you need to get in touch with her as well. And then Travis's is travis@irwp.org. And we can put those in the chat as well. So one last thing before we open for questions, we are a nonprofit organization, so we do take donations if you feel so compelled. This is giving season, so you have 3 different ways you can donate to IRWP. One is through Facebook, one is through PayPal on our website, and one is through a provider called Donately. On Donately, you can opt to actually do a monthly recurring donation if that's something that works for you. So just putting that out there for giving season if that's something that you guys feel compelled to do. So we're a little early for Q&A, so I hope that you guys have a bunch of questions. Does anyone want to drop in first? Okay, Margaret, I saw your hand raised. If you want to unmute, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Morgan. I have a question for Sandy and for Travis. Has anyone done some downstream before and after measurements on phosphorus, before restoration, after restoration? Any history of that kind of stuff?
Sure, thank you, Margaret. And I think Sandy will be joining us shortly, but Nicole or Travis, is that something that either of you want to jump on?
Yeah, this is Nicole. I can speak to that a little bit. So as far as in-stream measures of phosphorus before and after a particular project, that can be done, but it is, very difficult and takes time. For a project to establish after installation to demonstrate a phosphorus or a nutrient reduction. I will say the Arkansas-Oklahoma Compact Commission since 1999 has been measuring phosphorus concentrations, and we've seen a consistent decline through a variety of actions, as Travis mentioned in the introductory video. I do know that Sandy's group uses modeling to basically quantify the amount of avoided phosphorus from their restoration activities. And of course, those models are based on precipitation and slope and soil composition and things like that. They've done some very detailed soil phosphorus composition studies to be able to quantify that. And I'm sure Sandy can provide more detail whenever she's able to join. Did that answer your question, Margaret?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and you guys, I'm online.
Yes, thanks, Sandy.
I've been here, so yes. So we do measure. Actually, we don't model it, we measure it. There is a modeling component where you can estimate based on watershed scale data that's collected, and you don't actually have to do erosion measurements, but we also do erosion measurements and actually calculate load reductions in places where we do projects. So we're working on a report on the Little Sugar Creek project, and that particular site isn't a high load reduction, but I just got finished looking at those numbers, and the sediment was about 115 tons per year. So that's what, by doing that project, that's what we're preventing from coming out of the stream banks. You actually get many more, there's many more ways that you get sediment reduction, especially through those wetlands. And then also by creating a healthy native riparian, as the floodwaters come up, that's going to trap a lot of sediment and nutrients. And then just the oxygenation of the water is going to help the processes happen that reduces in-stream concentrations of nutrients. And so in addition to the avoidance, those projects do help to make the water quality better. It's really hard to quantify that on an in-stream basis by looking at in-stream.
Oh, Sandy, you went muted all of a sudden.
Oh, sorry.
You're okay.
Back on. Okay,
Yep.
well, I was going to say, just following up to what Nicole said, it's really hard to quantify, just one site within a watershed. Just watershed scale, water quality monitoring, and keeping up with the different practices that are being implemented and looking at changes in in-stream water quality over time is the best way to evaluate at a watershed scale. But it's difficult to quantify just a single project. But you can quantify how much you're preventing from going into the stream. So we do that through erosion monitoring, and we do that also when we create a banks model for a watershed, you can actually estimate just based on getting some simple evaluations. But to give you an idea on the West Fork, which is a highly unstable watershed and river, we've got several projects implemented in that watershed. And at this point, we're preventing for non-flood years approximately 15,000 tons per year and of sediment. And phosphorus is, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's probably about half of that in pounds per year. So these projects, you get these restorations that improve the local ecology and help to filter out more pollutants. And whereas if you just do water treatment, all you get is phosphorus removal from water treatment. So there's just so many benefits that you get from these projects, especially from the recreation standpoint as well, huge recreation benefits. And so, Margaret, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Sandy. Just a quick follow-up to that. Do you ever, when you come across an area in the watershed that has high legacy phosphorus, do you ever use plants to take that up and then harvest those plants and remove it from that area?
I'm familiar with that, and that's generally that kind of technique is used in association with some kind of bioremediation when you have hazardous waste contamination. But I'm sure you could use it to remove phosphorus as well. We've never done that, but I know that that's a way you can treat soils depending on what kind of contaminant you're trying to remove.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy. Is there anyone else who has any questions for Sandy or for Travis or I? Sandy, I do have a question for you. So Margaret asked, how if you guys measure the phosphorus and how you do that, what are some other parameters that you guys measure to, basically compare the success of projects?
Well, generally, we look at sediment, total phosphorus, and total nitrogen. And we're working on a paper. We've actually got numbers of these values for stream banks that we've sampled in watersheds in both the Illinois side and the Beaver Lake side. And we're going to put a paper out on that really soon. But we do have some other constituents that we've also done soluble phosphorus. We don't generally present that, but we will have that kind of data in this paper. And we also do particle size distribution. And the reason why that's important, it goes back to that water quality question. So when you're looking at what you prevent from going into a watershed from a stream bank, you've got, particles all the way down to less than 0.062. And then you've got cobble, you've got huge stuff going in. So those different size particles have different impacts in your watershed. And so from a water quality standpoint, the ones that are less than 0.062, they generally will not settle. And so they're going to be more problematic in your water system, like in Beaver Lake, for example. It's a drinking water source. And so we're going to have that information in the paper as well. And I haven't looked at the data in a long time. I think we also have total organic carbon is another parameter. But hopefully we're going to have at least a draft on that paper early next year. It's been a long time. We've been wanting to have this information out there for people to be able to use.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else on the floor have any questions?
This is Nicole, and I will ask for Sandy, and probably Travis can speak to this a little bit. Many times in the watershed, when we see one potential solution to an erosion problem is concrete and large rocks. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak to the unforeseen consequences of that method of stream bank restoration.
Oh, you mean people have placed concrete to try to stabilize a bank?
Exactly. Yes, a stream hammering type of.
Well, so we, I don't know if Travis has addressed any of this yet, but it's definitely a problem because sometimes they dump. In the past, they've dumped like construction waste to try to stabilize a bank. Sometimes they're dumping it to get rid of it. And so we find it in both cases, and it can be a real problem because you can have like a huge amount of material that was dumped along the floodplain and then covered up. And so you really kind of want to leave that alone unless you got the funding to go in there and it could be $1 million to remove all that. When it's been used for trying to stabilize a stream bank, we actually did a project where we removed all of it and then use natural materials to restore the stream bank. And you just got to make sure you have the funding to do it. But we try to remove all concrete. We don't use any concrete in our projects. And we use all natural stone and wood. And so, what do you do with it? A lot of times we end up having to haul it off to a landfill. So, Travis, what about you?
Well, the thing I was going to kind of highlight is I think a lot of people, particularly land managers who are just trying to deal with one particular problem at hand, maybe don't understand how complex of engineering and construction are going into the kinds of projects that Sandy's crew is doing. And so it's easy to look at a cut bank or a place where you're losing land and say, I'll just dump a bunch of riprap in there and cross my fingers and hope it works. That's a much different process than what Sandy's crew is doing, which is looking upstream and downstream of the reach in question, and then trying to identify a stable channel geometry and mimic a pattern that's already happening elsewhere in the stream. That's a much more complicated process, but it leads to a lot higher success rate. And so what I've seen just, in my time of visiting with landowners is places where folks have tried to fix, pretty big problems themselves. It's usually either failed or a lot of times made the problem worse. So you'll see a big old pile of riprap in the middle of the stream, where a landowner had dumped it 10 years ago, hoping it would slow down the erosion without really addressing the overall channel geometry and morphology problems of the stream, just because it's outside of the scope of what most of us are trained in. And so anytime a person is thinking of tackling a streambank erosion problem where it's threatening your property, I would really advocate to reach out to a firm like Sandy's that really understands the way these complex systems work and understands the permitting and the fundraising, and not just jump in and hop on the tractor and start pushing stuff around. Because I can't think of any time I've seen a project like that last long term.
Thank you, Nicole. I guess I have a question too. Anyone else, feel free to jump in if you have one. But what I was kind of wondering is about the maintenance of these projects. Travis and Sandy, and maybe even Nicole, if you want to speak to that. I know that you said 5 years, but do you want to expand on a little bit what people would expect to do while maintaining that newly built vegetation?
This is a hard one because the way we budget for infrastructure type projects, there's a different, you have capital investment and then maintenance or long-term maintenance or repairs usually comes from a different budget. So if you're working with a municipality, it's really difficult to kind of get those two things together. And with river restoration, I mean, they're hard projects. The only reason why we do them is because we love what we do and we love the positive impact that it has on the environment and society. They're really hard because it's impossible to get it perfectly right after construction. First of all, you have to spend years establishing that vegetation. You have to go back and water the plant. You have to fertilize them. If they get washed out, you got to replant them. If you don't do invasive management, you could end up with a stream bank covered in Johnson grass, which is not great habitat. So and then the other thing is you could build it, and we've had this happen. We had a record flood come through our lower Osage Creek project, the one that's at the mouth of the Illinois. 3 days after the construction crew left, a record flood came through. So we didn't have any vegetation established yet. So we didn't have that safeguard yet. And what do? I mean, you got to have funding to go in there and make repairs. And we definitely had to make some repairs on that. So what we recommend at this point is that you have a plan, not just for the initial data collection, design, and then construction, but you have a long-term plan and I call it project establishment period. And that first 5 years is really establishment. And you're going to be doing a lot of vegetation management, and you potentially might have to come in and do some flood repairs. And then even after 5 to 10 years, because it's possible not to have a major flood for 5 years. So you may not have that flood that's going to create a problem for your project until year 6. So you still need to be going out there and checking, making sure the project's safe. it's functioning the way it's supposed to, and it's having the desired outcomes that you got the funding for. So I know that's kind of crazy, but they're similar to like anytime you build infrastructure within a city doesn't think, oh, I'm going to go build that sidewalk and I never have to do anything to it again. No, they have some kind of plan to maintain all their infrastructure. At least we hope they do. That's what our taxpayer dollars go for. And it's the same with these types of restoration projects. It took decades for it to get that way. So it takes some time to get something that's going to be a healthy restoration. And in the literature, it says most projects that fail, they fail because there was not any follow-up maintenance to the projects. So we feel like one of the reasons why we're successful is because we stick with those projects for a long time. We're a nonprofit, so we're not looking to make a profit off of what we're doing. And our goal is to benefit society and to benefit the environment. So part of who we are is it fits with, keeping these projects for 10 years. But sometimes it's challenging to find the funding. I recommend finding the funding on the front end. It's harder to find it on the back end.
Could I jump in with one more thing about long-term maintenance? If you're just a private landowner trying to work on a stream section on your property, the way that it looks, it only really matters to you. But if you are designing a project for on a commercial site, or if you're a municipality, you just got to realize that whatever you're doing there, it's a big change to what the public is previously used to. And so if you put a lot of work in on the front end, educating the public about why you're doing what you're doing, if you even, depending on how visible the site is, if you're trying to take aesthetics into mind when you're designing these projects, it seems like there's going to be a lot more long-term buy-in, because even from just the revegetation projects that we've done, it's easy to think of a lot of projects where we've worked with one landowner or with one person on a city staff to revegetate an area. 2 years later, there's been some sort of turnover. That staff person isn't there. The vegetation gets mowed down. So having like a long-term plan, like Sandy mentioned, for what the practices are for maintaining it, because they aren't necessarily practices that a public works department or a commercial landscape crew is familiar with on a day-to-day basis. It's a different style of managing for these native species than just straight mowing and weed eating on a regular basis. Making sure you've got people in place who know how to do that and are bought into the vision, and that you're educating the folks that are using your property and maintaining it long term about why you're doing what you're doing, what it's supposed to look like, so that several years down the road it's not just mowed down again, or you don't have a lot of complaints from city folks saying, hey, this used to be really perfectly maintained and mowed down, and now it's all grown up, it's looking like it's neglected. Making sure you communicate that what's going on is not neglect, but it's a conscious improvement to what was going on there.
And just something to add on to what Travis was saying about the appearance, what we have found is when you maintain for native plants, that it looks great. And when you let those invasives come in, that's when you start getting complaints. And so giant ragweed, it's a native, but we treat it as an invasive because it'll take over a site. It's 12 feet tall. And so if you've got a park with this cute little stream in it and 12 feet tall ragweed, you're going to get a lot of complaints. But if you've got the native plants growing there, like beautyberry and rice cut grass, and just the native plants, you won't get the complaints. In fact, people will love it. Every once in a while you get somebody who doesn't even like the natives because it's not mowed, but we get very few complaints about the sites looking like a nuisance. But if we weren't doing something, I'm sure we would get a lot more complaints.
And it is pretty amazing how fast these areas can heal themselves and grow back. The video that Morgan did on Sager Creek, it's 2020 now. 10 years ago, there was not a tree on those stream banks. And now some of these trees are 30, 35, 40 feet tall just in 10 years. And a lot of those weren't even planted. They just, volunteered sycamores and silver maples and things like that. So it's pretty amazing how fast these areas can regenerate with just a little bit of management.
Well, thank you both for speaking to that. I know that's a very important element of these projects, of any riparian project is the maintenance part of it. We had a question on the Facebook chat, and I'm curious, and maybe Nicole, you want to talk about this, but what can we do as an organization? What can people do to try and address this on the front end before the land is developed and before there are already stream bank erosion issues?
Yeah, I can take that one. So, I mean, that's a very complex question, Morgan. So, I mean, as a local citizen, I would say organize. You can do a lot. So if you're living in Northwest Arkansas on the headwaters of many of these streams, you can, I think, really start, what you want to get is a neighborhood specific movement or a tributary specific movement around where you work, live, or are passionate about. And, do a creek cleanup, start to drive awareness around the creek that's flowing through your neighborhood. I'm thinking like Friends of Clabber Creek in Fayetteville. So that's, you have Clabber Creek running right through the middle of a new residential development, and they are basically stewarding that creek that's that they use for recreational purposes, and it's a great example. If you are kind of more rural or have a larger piece of land, we always advocate at IRWP for land conservation of high quality lands being the most cost-effective way to maintain water quality. So if you are up in the headwaters of Clear Creek, upstream of Lake Fayetteville, that's a high priority area for us for land conservation efforts. And you can work with, the cities of Fayetteville or Springdale or Northwest Arkansas Land Trust to conserve those high quality lands. Now, in relation to stream bank erosion, putting your land in conservation is not going to stop the stream bank erosion, unfortunately, and it will need a restoration effort in conjunction with conservation. But, really just taking ownership of the natural waterways that you have access to and trying to protect those and clean them up and work with your local state, city, or county to help you do that.
Right. A lot of it is around education, it seems, letting people know these are the things that really help this on the front end. These are the things that address, these issues before they come along. Okay, anyone in Google Meet have any questions for any of us or discussion topics? Feel free to drop them in the chat if you'd like.
Hey, Morgan, I'd like to offer, we've got a presentation that we did for the Society of Landscape Architects. And it's got some of the design drawings and before pictures for the Little Sugar Creek project. I think there might be a before and after photo for the Lower Osage Creek project in there as well. So I can provide a PDF to you in case anybody who's participating would like to see that. So
yeah, it's great.
It's just I believe it's a general presentation on river restoration is the focus.
Yeah, great. We'll be posting this webinar completed. It'll automatically go on Facebook, but we'll be posting it on YouTube, and we'll make sure and include those assets along with wherever it ends up.
Okay.
Okay. One more ask for questions. If not, I'm gonna let all of you folks go, and thank you guys so much for participating. This was really fun to get to do, and like I said, I've just been with the IRWP since March, so getting to walk these tours with Sandy and Travis was a great experience for me, and I hope that you guys learned something today. Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining. We're happy to have you here.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.